The fluorescent lights of Northwood High's hallway hummed a monotonous tune, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. My name is Elena, and I've always been different. Not in a supernatural, magical way, or so I thought, but in the unapologetic way I carried myself. I was the captain of the debate team, the student body president, and I had a resting face that could curdle milk. Timid wasn't in my vocabulary. This year, however, a new kind of person had enrolled, and his name was Jax. He was the resident freak. He kept to himself, his lanky frame always draped in a hoodie, his face obscured by a curtain of dark, unruly hair. Whispers followed him like a shadow, painting him as everything from a drug dealer to a cultist. But I saw something else in the rare glimpses I got of his eyes, a wildness, a depth that both intrigued and unsettled me. Our first real interaction was as mundane as it was electrifying. I was at my locker, wrestling with a jammed door, my frustration mounting with each futile tug. A low chuckle rumbled from behind me. "Need a hand?" I turned, my retort ready on my lips, but it died when I saw him. Jax. He was leaning against the opposite lockers, his hood down for once. His face was all sharp angles and shadows, but his eyes, they were a startling, piercing shade of amber. They held an intensity that made the air crackle. "I've got it," I snapped, yanking on the locker again. It didn't budge. He pushed off the lockers and moved towards me with a fluid grace that was almost predatory. He smelled of rain and damp earth, a scent that was both clean and primal. He placed his hand on the locker, his fingers brushing mine. A jolt, hot and sharp, shot up my arm. I snatched my hand back as if burned. "It's the hinge," he said, his voice a low baritone that vibrated through me. "It's warped." He applied a gentle, steady pressure, and the locker popped open with a groan of protesting metal. I stared at him, momentarily speechless. Up close, he was captivating. A faint scar cut through his left eyebrow, and his jaw was dusted with a day's worth of stubble. The freak label suddenly seemed laughably inadequate. "Thanks," I managed, my voice a little breathless. He just nodded, his amber eyes lingering on mine for a moment too long before he pulled his hood back up and disappeared into the throng of students. I stood there, my heart hammering against my ribs, the ghost of his touch tingling on my skin. The scent of rain and secrets clung to the air, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that my perfectly ordered world was about to be turned upside down. Chapter 2: A Challenge in the Woods. My curiosity about Jax was a relentless itch I couldn't scratch. I started observing him more closely, noticing the way he moved with a coiled energy, the way his head would tilt as if listening to something no one else could hear. He was an enigma, and I was a born puzzle solver. I decided a direct approach was the only way to get answers. I found out he had a habit of disappearing into the woods behind the football field during lunch. So, one crisp autumn afternoon, I followed him. The woods were a riot of fall colors, the air thick with the scent of decaying leaves and damp earth. I found him sitting on a fallen log, sketching in a worn leather-bound book. He didn't seem surprised to see me. "Come to interrogate the freak?" he asked without looking up, his voice laced with a bitter amusement. "I came to understand him," I countered, my arms crossed over my chest. "People are afraid of you, you know." He finally looked up, and his amber eyes were guarded. "And you're not?" "I'm not afraid of anything," I said, and it was the honest truth. Fear was a luxury I couldn't afford. A slow smile spread across his lips, transforming his face from brooding to devastatingly handsome. "Is that a challenge?" "Maybe it is," I said, my chin tilted in defiance. He stood up, his height and presence suddenly seeming to fill the small clearing. He took a step towards me, and another, until he was so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body. That scent of rain and earth was stronger here, more intoxicating. "You want to understand?" he murmured, his voice a low growl that sent a shiver down my spine. "Then you need to see beyond what you think you know." He reached out and gently tucked a stray strand of my hair behind my ear, his fingers tracing the shell of my ear. My breath hitched. The air between us was thick with an unspoken tension, a raw, primal energy that was both terrifying and exhilarating. I could see the wildness in his eyes, the untamed spirit he kept hidden beneath his hoodie and his silence. And in that moment, I knew I was in way over my head. But for the first time in my life, I didn't care. Chapter 3. The Unveiling of a Different Beast. The next few days were a blur of stolen glances and charged silences. We were partners in a biology project, of all things. The irony wasn't lost on me. We spent hours in the library, supposedly researching cellular mitosis, but the real study was of each other. I saw a different side of Jax. He was intelligent, with a dry wit that was as sharp as his jawline. He was also surprisingly gentle, the way he handled the delicate slides for the microscope, the way his voice softened when he explained a complex concept. The freak was a facade, a carefully constructed wall to keep people out. But I was determined to scale it. One evening, we were working late in the empty library. A storm had rolled in, the rain lashing against the tall windows, the thunder rattling the panes. The power flickered and then died, plunging us into darkness. I yelped in surprise, my hand instinctively reaching for him in the blackness. My fingers brushed against his arm, and I felt a tremor run through him. His skin was hot, almost feverish. "Jax? Are you okay?" "I'm fine," he said, his voice strained. I could hear his ragged breaths in the darkness. "You're not fine. You're shaking." I fumbled for my phone, its flashlight cutting through the gloom. What I saw made my blood run cold. Jax was leaning against a bookshelf, his face pale and beaded with sweat, his eyes squeezed shut in pain. His hands were clenched into fists, his knuckles white. "Jax, what's happening?" I asked, my voice filled with a concern that surprised me. "You need to leave," he ground out, his voice a pained rasp. "Now." "I'm not leaving you," I said, my hand on his arm. He flinched at my touch, his eyes snapping open. They were no longer amber. They were glowing, a molten gold in the dim light. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound that was not entirely human. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I didn't back away. I was not afraid. I was captivated. Chapter 4. The Moon's Revelation. The growl that escaped Jax's lips was deep and guttural, a sound that resonated in my very bones. His glowing, golden eyes were fixed on me, a mixture of pain and something else. Something wild and untamed. The air in the library crackled with a raw, primal energy. "Elena, please," he rasped, his voice a desperate plea. "You need to go." But I was frozen, not by fear, but by a strange, exhilarating curiosity. This was the secret he had been hiding, the wildness I had sensed in him. "What's happening to you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the storm raging outside and the one brewing within him. He groaned, his body convulsing. I saw the muscles in his arms and shoulders bunch and shift, his clothes straining at the seams. His features contorted, his teeth elongating into sharp canines. The transformation was both terrifying and mesmerizing. I was witnessing the impossible, a fairy tale monster coming to life before my very eyes. And then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. Where Jax had stood, there was now a magnificent creature, a wolf the size of a small horse. Its fur was the color of midnight, its eyes the same molten gold that had stared at me just moments before. It let out a low, mournful howl that seemed to shake the very foundations of the library. I should have screamed. I should have run. But I didn't. I stood my ground, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I saw the pain and confusion in the wolf's eyes, the same pain and confusion I had seen in Jax's. This magnificent beast was him. Slowly, I extended my hand. The wolf flinched, a low growl rumbling in its chest. "Jax," I whispered, my voice soft but steady. "It's me. It's Elena." The wolf's ears twitched. It took a hesitant step towards me, its golden eyes never leaving mine. It sniffed my outstretched hand, its wet nose cold against my skin. I didn't pull back. I stood my ground, my gaze unwavering. And then, it did something that made my breath catch in my throat. It licked my hand, its rough tongue a startlingly gentle caress. In that moment, the line between man and beast blurred, and I knew that my life would never be the same. Chapter 5. An Alpha's Unspoken Claim. The days that followed the revelation in the library were a whirlwind of unspoken words and lingering touches. Jax, the man, the wolf, had entrusted me with his biggest secret, and it had forged a bond between us that was as undeniable as it was dangerous. He explained everything to me, the curse of his bloodline, the pull of the moon, the constant struggle to control the beast within. He was an alpha, he told me, born to lead, but he had chosen a life of solitude to protect those around him. Until me. "You're not afraid of me," he said one evening, his voice filled with a sense of wonder. We were in the woods again, our sanctuary. "I've never been afraid of you," I replied, my fingers tracing the scar above his eyebrow. "I was drawn to your strength, to the fire in your eyes. The wolf. It's a part of that." He leaned in, his forehead resting against mine. He smelled of rain and pine, a scent that had become my favorite. "You have no idea what you do to me, Elena," he murmured, his voice a low, husky growl. "You're the first person who has ever seen all of me and not run away." "I'm not going anywhere," I promised, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite name. He pulled back, his amber eyes searching mine. "I'm dangerous," he warned, his voice a low rumble. "The beast inside me. It wants you. It wants to claim you." A thrill, sharp and intoxicating, shot through me. "And what does the man want?" I challenged, my voice a seductive whisper. A slow, predatory smile spread across his lips. "The man," he said, his voice dropping to a husky murmur, "wants the same thing." He leaned in and captured my lips with his. The kiss was not gentle. It was a clash of teeth and tongues, a raw primal claiming that left me breathless and wanting more. It was a kiss that sealed our fate, a promise of the passion and danger that lay ahead. And in the heart of the woods, under the watchful eye of the moon, I willingly surrendered to the alpha who had claimed my heart, my body, and my soul. Chapter 6. The Alpha's Possession. The secret we shared was a live wire, humming with a dangerous and intoxicating current that connected us even when we were rooms apart. At school, things were different. The invisible wall around Jax had not so much crumbled as it had shifted, reforming to create a space that included only me. His eyes were a constant presence, a warm weight on my skin whether I was answering a question in calculus or leading a student council meeting. His signature scent of rain and damp earth seemed to cling to me, a phantom embrace that marked me as his in a way no one else could comprehend. The change did not go unnoticed. My friends, Sarah and Chloe, watched me with a mixture of concern and bewilderment. "You seem distracted," Sarah commented during lunch, her brow furrowed as she watched Jax walk past our table, his amber gaze locking with mine for a potent, silent beat. "And he seems possessive," Chloe added, her voice a low whisper. "He looks at you like you're the last piece of chocolate on earth." They weren't wrong. His protectiveness was a tangible thing. When Mark Jessup, the school's quarterback and resident golden boy, tried to flirt with me by my locker, Jax materialized out of thin air. He didn't say a word. He simply stood beside me, his presence radiating a quiet, lethal warning. He leaned against the locker, all coiled muscle and simmering intensity, and Mark, for all his bluster, paled and mumbled an excuse before making a hasty retreat. Later that afternoon, I confronted him about it in the relative privacy of the library stacks. "You can't just scare off every guy who talks to me," I said, my voice low but firm. I wasn't some damsel in distress needing a knight in shining armor, or a wolf in a black hoodie. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound that was more wolf than man. "He was touching your arm," he stated, his jaw tight. "He had no right." "I can handle myself, Jax," I countered, stepping into his space, my hands on my hips. I refused to be intimidated. I'm not a possession to be guarded. His amber eyes flared, a flicker of molten gold. He closed the distance between us, backing me against a bookshelf. My heart hammered, but my gaze didn't waver. "You're right," he murmured, his voice a husky caress against my ear. "You're not a possession." He braced his hands on either side of my head, trapping me. "You're my partner. My equal. But the beast inside me, he doesn't understand nuance. He sees a threat, he wants to eliminate it. He sees what is his." He leaned in, his lips brushing the sensitive skin of my neck, sending a shiver cascading down my spine. "And he wants to mark it." His words were a challenge and a promise. "Then maybe you should," I whispered, my defiance melting into a desire so sharp it stole my breath. It was a reckless invitation, a surrender to the wildness that called to a dormant part of my own soul. He didn't need another word. His mouth found mine in a kiss that was pure, unadulterated possession. It was a brand, a claim, a silent vow in the language of tooth and tongue. And as he lifted me onto the library table, scattering books in a chaotic wave, I knew I was willingly giving him a part of myself that no one else would ever touch. He was the freak, the alpha, the beast. And he was mine. Chapter 7: Scars and Sanctuaries. The physical intensity of our connection was a wildfire, but it was in the quiet moments that I began to understand the man behind the wolf. He finally took me to his sanctuary, a small, forgotten cabin nestled deep in the state forest, miles away from the manicured lawns and teenage drama of Northwood. It was rustic and sparse, smelling of old wood, turpentine, and Jax. Dozens of canvases were stacked against the walls, filled with stark, beautiful landscapes and haunting golden-eyed wolves. This was where he bled his soul onto the canvas, where the beast and the man found a fragile peace. One evening, as a fire crackled in the stone hearth, he finally told me why he had left his pack. My father was the alpha, he said, his voice a low, somber murmur as he stared into the flames. He ruled with fear. He saw compassion as a weakness. When I came of age, he expected me to challenge him, to kill him, and take his place. I watched his profile, the hard lines of his jaw, the flicker of old pain in his eyes. And you wouldn't do it. It wasn't a question. He shook his head, a muscle feathering in his cheek. I challenged him, yes. That is our way. But I refused to land the killing blow. I defeated him and then I walked away. To them, it was the ultimate dishonor. I abandoned my destiny, my pack. He turned to me, his gaze raw with a vulnerability that clutched at my heart. I couldn't become the monster he was, Elena. So I ran. His story resonated with a part of me I kept hidden. Everyone saw Elena the president, Elena the captain, the girl who had her entire future mapped out. No one saw the immense pressure from my parents to be perfect, to attend the right Ivy League school, to follow their pre-approved path. I know what it's like, I confessed, my voice soft. To feel like you're living a life someone else designed for you. He took my hand, his thumb stroking over my knuckles. That's why you're so strong, he said. You fight for control of your own life every single day. In that moment, our bond deepened, transcending the primal pull of shifter and mate. He saw my strength, and I saw his honor. But as we sat in the comforting silence, a sharp, unfamiliar scent cut through the air on the night breeze. Jax went rigid, his head snapping towards the window, a low, menacing growl building in his chest. His amber eyes bled to gold. What is it? I asked, my own body tensing in response to his alarm. We're not alone, he snarled, moving to stand between me and the door, his body a solid wall of protective muscle. Another wolf. They found me. The peace of our sanctuary had been shattered, and the past he had run from was no longer content to stay in the shadows. Chapter 8: A Rival in the Ranks. The wolf he scented was not just a rogue. He was a memory Jax had tried to bury. His name was Marcus, Jax's former second-in-command and the one who had coveted the alpha position with a venomous ambition. We didn't have to wait long for a confrontation. 2 days later, he was there, leaning against my car in the school parking lot as if he had every right in the world. He was the dark mirror of Jax. While Jax was lean and moved with a predatory grace, Marcus was built like a bruiser, with thick, muscular shoulders and a sneer permanently etched on his face. His eyes were a cold, flat gray, devoid of the fire and warmth that made Jax's so captivating. So this is what the great alpha ran to, Marcus drawled, his gaze sweeping over me with a dismissive, insulting smirk. A fragile human pet. Before I could unleash the scathing retort bubbling on my lips, Jax was there, moving so fast he was almost a blur. He stood between us, a low, guttural snarl ripping from his chest. You will not speak to her, he growled, the sound vibrating with barely contained violence. Protective, are we? Marcus taunted, unfazed. The pack is a mess without a true leader, Jax. Your father's cronies are running it into the ground. They need a real alpha. One who isn't afraid to get his hands dirty. One who isn't distracted by a human. He directed his last words at me, his eyes filled with contempt. This was my moment. This was not just Jax's fight. He's not distracted, I said, my voice clear and cold, cutting through the tension. He's committed. Something you wouldn't understand. A true leader inspires loyalty, Marcus. They don't demand it through fear and intimidation. From what I can see, all you have is a bad attitude and a superiority complex. Marcus's sneer faltered, a flicker of surprise in his cold eyes. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by a fragile human. His surprise quickly turned to rage. He lunged, not at Jax but towards me. Jax intercepted him with a roar, the two of them crashing against the side of my car with a sickening crunch of metal. It wasn't a wolf fight, but it was just as brutal. Fists flew, and the air was filled with snarled curses and the thud of bodies colliding. Jax was faster, more agile, but Marcus was a wall of brute force. I didn't scream or run. I saw my opening. While they were locked together, I grabbed my heavy chemistry textbook from my bag. Marcus! I shouted. He instinctively turned his head for a fraction of a second. It was all Jax needed. He drove his fist into Marcus's gut, doubling him over, then threw him to the asphalt. Jax stood over him, breathing heavily, his knuckles bleeding. His golden eyes were blazing with the fury of the beast. He wanted to kill him. I could see it. Jax, I said, my voice sharp and commanding. Enough. He looked at me, the wolfish rage in his eyes warring with the man who listened to my voice. He took a shuddering breath, the gold receding back to amber. Marcus pushed himself up, spitting blood onto the ground. This isn't over, he hissed. Pack law demands a formal challenge. I'll take everything from you. Starting with her. He stalked off, leaving us in the sudden silence of the parking lot. Jax turned to me, his face a mask of fury and fear. This is exactly why you should stay away from me, Elena. He put his hands on you. And we put him on the ground. I shot back, my adrenaline still pumping. I'm not made of glass, Jax. I chose this. I choose you. So stop trying to push me away and start figuring out how we're going to win. My words hung in the air, a challenge and a declaration. I wasn't his weakness, I was his partner, and it was time he fully accepted it. Chapter 9. The Mating Mark. The argument that night was brutal. Jax, terrified by Marcus's threat against me, fell back on his instinct to isolate and protect. He paced the small cabin like a caged wolf, insisting I leave town, that I go somewhere safe until it was over. And where would that be, Jax? I finally yelled, my frustration boiling over. Hiding under my bed? You are my safety. Don't you get that? Pushing me away isn't protecting me, it's abandoning me. It's telling me you don't trust me, that you think I'm weak. My voice broke on the last word, the accusation hitting him harder than any physical blow. He stopped pacing and stared at me, his face etched with torment. Elena, No, I cut him off, stepping towards him, my eyes blazing. You ran from your pack because you refused to become a monster. Don't run from me now. Don't be a coward. We face this together, or we lose everything. My words shattered his resolve. With a ragged groan, he crossed the space between us and pulled me into a crushing embrace, burying his face in my hair. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. You're right. I'm just so afraid of losing you. You won't, I promised, my arms wrapping around his strong back. You and me, remember? We win. That admission, that shared vulnerability, broke the dam between us. He lifted his head, his amber eyes dark with an emotion so intense it made my knees weak. He kissed me, not with the desperate claiming of the library or the fierce possession in the parking lot, but with a raw, soul-deep reverence. It was a kiss of apology, of acceptance, of unwavering devotion. He swept me into his arms and carried me to the simple bed in the corner of the cabin. Our coming together was not just a physical act, it was a ceremony, a sealing of our bond in the most primal way possible. It was a storm of passion and a haven of peace, a tempest of tangled limbs and whispered promises. In the quiet aftermath, as we lay wrapped in each other's arms, the firelight dancing over our skin, he looked at me with a fierce solemnity. "There is something we must do," he murmured, his voice husky. "A mating mark. It will link us. I will feel you, know when you are in danger. And every wolf, including Marcus, will know that you are mine, the mate of an alpha. An attack on you will be a declaration of war on me." "Is it? Does it hurt?" I asked, my voice a whisper. "For a moment," he admitted. "But it will bind us. Forever." There was no hesitation. "Do it," I said, my gaze locked with his. He gently tilted my head, exposing the sensitive junction where my neck met my shoulder. He leaned down, and I felt the warmth of his breath, then the sharp fleeting sting of his canines piercing my skin. A jolt of pure energy, white-hot and electric, shot through me, arcing from the bite straight to my soul. I cried out, a sound that was half pain and half pleasure. I felt him, his strength, his love, his very essence, flooding my veins. When he pulled back, he licked the wound, and a profound sense of peace settled over me. He was in me, and I was in him. As he looked at me, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek, I saw the matching mark that had appeared on his own shoulder, a faint, shimmering echo of mine. We were one. And we were ready for war. Chapter 10. The Eve of the Challenge. The challenge was set for the next full moon, just 3 nights away. Pack law dictated the terms, a fight for dominance in a neutral, sacred territory, the old stone circle at the peak of Shadow Ridge. The winner would be Alpha, the loser would be exiled or killed. Marcus had made his intentions for Jax clear. The final days were a blur of intense preparation. We were no longer just a boy and a girl in love, we were a strategic unit. We spent hours in the cabin, Jax drawing maps of the terrain from memory while I researched lunar cycles and atmospheric conditions on my laptop, searching for any small advantage. My debate skills came into play as I grilled him, forcing him to analyze Marcus's fighting style, his weaknesses, his triggers. "He's all brute force," Jax explained, pacing before the fire. "He leads with his right, always. He gets angry, and he gets sloppy." "So we don't meet his anger with anger," I strategized, my pen tapping against my notepad. "We meet it with precision. You have to be faster, smarter. You need to outthink him, not just outfight him." The night of the challenge, a palpable tension hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The moon was a perfect, luminous silver disk in the inky sky, bathing the forest in an ethereal glow. Jax was silent, his energy coiled tight like a spring. He had already begun the change, his senses sharpening, his eyes a constant, glowing amber. He wanted me to stay in the cabin, locked and safe. I refused. "Your pack needs to see me," I argued, pulling on my sturdiest hiking boots. "They need to see that you're not fighting for a fragile human pet. They need to see a future Luna who stands by her alpha's side. Your strength is not just in your claws, Jax. It's in us." He saw the unshakable resolve in my eyes and finally nodded. My presence was a strategic move, a statement. When we arrived at the stone circle, Marcus was already there. He had brought 2 other wolves from the pack, their faces grim and their stances hostile. They were his witnesses, his supporters. The air was cold, but the animosity radiating from the 3 of them was hot enough to burn. "So, you brought the human," Marcus sneered, his arms crossed over his massive chest. "Want her to watch you die?" Before Jax could respond, I stepped forward. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, but my voice was steady, imbued with all the authority I could muster from my years of public speaking. "I am here to watch a true alpha claim his rightful place," I announced, my voice carrying in the silent clearing. I looked not at Marcus, but at his 2 companions. "I am here to witness the return of a leader who values honor over brutality, who understands that true strength lies not in ruling by fear, but in the courage to protect those you lead. That is Jax. What truly does Marcus offer you? More of the same fear your old alpha instilled? Is that the future you want for your pack?" A seed of doubt. I saw it flicker in the eyes of one of the wolves. My words had hit their mark. Marcus's face contorted in a mask of fury. "Enough talk," he roared. "The moon is high. Let's end this." A guttural roar answered him, but it came from Jax. I stepped back as the transformation took him. It was faster this time, more violent, fueled by purpose. Bones snapped and reformed, fur sprouted, and in seconds, the magnificent black wolf stood in his place, his golden eyes blazing with lunar light. Across the circle, Marcus underwent his own brutal change, becoming a hulking grey beast of scarred muscle and snarling teeth. The two massive wolves began to circle each other, a low, deadly growl the only sound in the clearing. I watched, my breath held captive in my chest. My fear was a cold knot in my stomach, but my faith in him was a burning fire. The fight began with a deafening roar as they crashed into each other, a whirlwind of fang and claw under the light of the full moon. Chapter 11, Blood and Moonlight. The collision was a shockwave of sound and fury. 2 tons of muscle and rage met in the center of the stone circle, the impact echoing off the ancient monoliths. From my vantage point near the edge of the clearing, the sheer scale of their power was terrifying. This wasn't a fistfight in a parking lot, this was a battle between titans, a dance of death choreographed by instinct and moonlight. Marcus, in his hulking grey form, was a battering ram. He charged again and again, his strategy simple: overwhelm Jax with brute force. He lunged, jaws snapping, aiming for Jax's throat, his legs, any part he could cripple. But Jax was a different kind of fighter. He was the wind to Marcus's rock. He moved with a fluid, breathtaking grace, dodging, weaving, using Marcus's momentum against him. He was a blur of black fur and golden eyes, a shadow warrior under the stark white moon. I watched with a clinical, terrifying focus, my mind racing, analyzing every move. Just as we'd discussed, Marcus was predictable. He favored his right side, telegraphing his lunges with a slight dip of his shoulder. He fought with pure, blind rage, leaving himself open. Jax exploited these openings with brutal efficiency. He didn't meet force with force. He used his speed to land quick, debilitating strikes, a slash across a flank, a snap at a leg, before melting back into the shadows. The 2 wolves who had come with Marcus watched in stony silence, their expressions unreadable. But I could feel their surprise. They had expected a quick, bloody end for the alpha who had abandoned them. They had not expected this masterclass in strategy and control. My scent on the air was a constant factor in the fight. For Jax, it was an anchor, a reminder of what he was fighting for. I saw his head turn slightly in my direction after a particularly vicious dodge, his golden eyes finding mine for a split second, a silent reassurance. For Marcus, my presence was an irritant, a goad. "Is this all you have, Jax?" he snarled, the words a guttural distortion coming from the wolf's throat. "Fighting like a coward, hiding behind your human whore." The taunt worked. A roar of pure fury erupted from Jax, and for a terrifying moment, he abandoned strategy. He met Marcus's next charge head-on. The sound of their bodies crashing together was sickening. They rolled on the ground in a tangled mass of fur and claws, snapping and tearing at one another. This was Marcus's fight, a brawl of pure strength, and he had the advantage. My heart leaped into my throat. Jax, the leg. His left leg. I shouted, my voice cutting through the snarling chaos. I remembered Jax telling me about an old training injury Marcus had. It was a gamble, but it worked. My voice broke through his rage. He twisted, his powerful jaws finding Marcus's left hind leg and clamping down with a sickening crunch of bone. Marcus howled in pain and fury, kicking out and catching Jax in the side with his free hind leg. I heard the crack of ribs, and Jax was thrown clear, landing heavily on the ground. He struggled to his feet, a ragged limp now hindering his movements, his side matted with dark blood that glistened in the moonlight. He was injured. Badly. Marcus, though hobbled, saw his advantage. A predatory, triumphant gleam entered his eyes. He gathered himself, ignoring his shattered leg, and prepared to launch himself at Jax for the killing blow. My calculated risk had backfired, and the man I loved was about to pay the price. Chapter 12, Aluna's Command. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through my strategic calm. My breath hitched, my hands clenched into useless fists. In that horrifying instant, as Marcus lowered his head for the final deadly charge, every instinct screamed at me to run, to hide, to look away. But I wasn't that girl. I was Elena, the student body president, the debate captain, and the mate of an alpha. And I would not let him die. I didn't scream. A scream was a plea for help. It was a sound of weakness. Instead, I drew myself up to my full height, planted my feet firmly on the damp earth, and did what I did best. I commanded the room. Enough. My voice, not a shout but a clear, ringing order, sliced through the primal tension of the clearing. It was a sound that did not belong there, human, female, yet imbued with an authority so absolute it was utterly alien. It was the voice I used to silence a rowdy assembly, to win a final debate round, to make people listen. And it worked. The effect was instantaneous and startling. Marcus, already coiled to spring, froze mid-snarl. His massive head turned, his cold grey eyes fixing on me with sheer disbelief. The two pack wolves who stood as witnesses flinched as if struck, their ears flattening against their skulls in an instinctual show of submission. They weren't reacting to a human, they were reacting to a tone that resonated with the ancient laws of the pack, the undeniable command of a Luna. That single moment of hesitation was all Jax needed. While Marcus was distracted by my audacity, Jax surged forward, not in a desperate lunge, but with the last of his explosive power. He ignored Marcus's throat and instead drove his entire body into Marcus's injured leg. The sickening crunch echoed in the clearing as the bone gave way completely. Marcus collapsed with a howl of agony, his charge dissolving into a pathetic, wounded heap. Jax didn't stop. He was on top of him in an instant, his massive paws pinning Marcus's shoulders to the ground, his jaws dripping with blood, his and Marcus's, clamped just inches from the defeated wolf's throat. The fight was over. Silence descended, broken only by Marcus's pained whimpers and Jax's ragged, heaving breaths. Jax held him there, the killing power evident in every taut muscle, his golden eyes blazing with a righteous fury. But he didn't strike. He looked from the whimpering wolf beneath him to me. His gaze was a question, but it also held a new kind of awe. He had seen what I had done. He had felt the power in my voice that had turned the tide. Slowly, deliberately, I walked forward, stopping just outside the stone circle. I met the stunned gazes of the two pack wolves, holding their eyes until they looked away, lowering their heads. I was not their alpha's pet. I was his partner. And they knew it. My command had saved him, and in doing so, had cemented a power I never knew I possessed. Chapter 13. The Weight of the Mantle. The moon hung directly overhead, a silent, silver witness to the conclusion of the challenge. Jax stood over his defeated rival, the victor. Blood dripped from his jaws onto Marcus's grey fur. Pack law was unambiguous, brutal, and absolute. As the new alpha, he was not only entitled but expected to end the life of the one who had challenged him. It was the old way, the way of his father, the way that ensured no threat would rise again. The two witness wolves watched, their posture no longer hostile, but expectant. They were waiting for the final, bloody act that would cement Jax's dominance. Marcus lay whimpering, his body trembling, the arrogance and fury in his eyes replaced by the primal terror of a defeated animal. I held my breath, my hands clasped so tightly my knuckles were white. This was the moment of truth, the crossroads that would define his reign. He had run from this choice once before, refusing to kill his own father. But this was different. Marcus had threatened me, had fought to kill him. Vengeance would be justified. Jax's golden eyes flickered to me. He saw the tension in my stance, but he also saw the unwavering trust. I would not tell him what to do. I would not influence this. The pack needed an alpha who could make the hard choices, and this choice had to be his and his alone. He let out a long, shuddering breath, the hot steam pluming in the cold night air. Then, he did the unexpected. He released his hold. He took a step back from Marcus, his posture still dominant, but no longer threatening immediate death. A low growl of confusion rumbled from one of the witnesses. Jax ignored him. He held his position over Marcus, and then he spoke, his voice a deep, guttural sound that was still more wolf than man, but the words were clear. This pack has bled enough under the law of fear. It ends. Now. He turned his head towards the two witnesses. Marcus is defeated. His challenge is ended. He will be exiled, stripped of all rank. If he ever sets foot in this territory again, he will be hunted as a rogue. This is the new law. We do not kill our own for ambition. We build strength through unity, not through fear. He then looked down at Marcus, his golden eyes burning with cold authority. Go. Run, and do not ever return. With a final, pathetic whimper, Marcus struggled to his feet, dragging his ruined leg, and scrambled away into the darkness of the forest, a broken and banished wolf. Jax stood for a long moment, the bloody and battered victor. Then, slowly, with a visible effort that spoke of his immense pain and exhaustion, he turned to the two remaining wolves. They were staring at him, not with the triumphant fervor they might show a killer, but with a dawning, stunned respect. He had shown strength not just in the fight, but in his mercy. He was truly not his father's son. One by one, they lowered their heads and then their entire bodies to the ground in the ultimate sign of submission. They were not just acknowledging the winner. They were pledging fealty to their new alpha. His duty done, the immense strain of the night finally overwhelmed him. His body shuddered, the wolf form receding, bones shifting with painful groans until the man was left in its place. He was naked, covered in blood and deep gashes, his body a canvas of pain. He took one staggering step towards me before his eyes rolled back in his head and he collapsed, unconscious, into my waiting arms. Chapter 14. Healing and Whispers. The weight of him was immense, a dead weight of exhausted muscle and bone. With the help of the two newly loyal pack members, Silas, the older, more thoughtful one, and a younger wolf named Finn, we managed to get Jax back to the cabin. They carried him with a reverence that was a stark contrast to their earlier hostility, laying him gently on the bed. They offered to stay, but I saw the raw, open wounds covering his body and knew this was something I had to do myself. It felt like a rite of passage, my first act as his Luna. Get some rest, Alpha, Silas said quietly, his gaze respectful as he looked at me. He is in good hands. The hours that followed were a blur of antiseptic, clean cloths, and whispered reassurances. I cleaned the gashes and deep bites, my stomach churning at the sight of his pain. The broken ribs were the worst. I could only bind them tightly and pray they would heal correctly. Werewolf physiology was remarkable, he had told me, capable of healing injuries that would kill a human, but it wasn't instantaneous. It required energy, rest, and time. As I worked, I felt the strange, thrumming connection of the mating mark at my shoulder. It was a dull ache now, a sympathetic echo of his own agony. Through it, I could feel the rhythm of his life force, a steady, powerful beat beneath the pain. It was a comfort, a lifeline in the quiet, firelit cabin. He finally woke just before dawn, his amber eyes hazy with pain. Elena, he rasped, his hand finding mine. I'm here, I whispered, stroking his hair back from his forehead. You were incredible. A faint smile touched his lips. We were incredible, he corrected me, his thumb stroking my skin. Your voice. It was like a thunderclap in my head. The voice of an alpha. He closed his eyes. Of my Luna. 2 days later, Silas returned. He came bearing gifts of food and some foul-smelling herbal poultices from the pack's healer. He reported that Marcus was long gone, but the news of his exile had sent shockwaves through the pack. Many are relieved, Silas explained, his expression grim as he accepted the cup of water I offered. They were tired of the bloodshed, of living in fear. They welcome a new way. But not all, I surmised, seeing the worry in his eyes. He nodded gravely. There is an old guard. Elders, mostly. Those who were loyal to Jax's father. They see mercy as a fatal flaw. They whisper that Jax has been softened by the human world, that his mating with you is proof of his weakness. He looked directly at me, his gaze not unkind, but heavy with meaning. They see you as a vulnerability, a corruption of the bloodline. They are stirring up trouble, turning the fearful against you both. The victory at the Stone Circle wasn't the end of the war, it was merely the first battle. We had defeated the obvious threat, the charging bull. Now we faced something far more dangerous, a quiet, insidious poison seeping into the foundations of the pack, threatening to rot it from within. And I was their primary target. Chapter 15. The First Decree. The whispers grew into a low, steady murmur that I could almost hear on the wind. Jax healed with supernatural speed, his wounds closing and ribs knitting, but a storm was brewing in his pack, and his absence was allowing it to fester. He was restless, the instincts of a new alpha screaming at him to face his people, to solidify his claim not just with force, but with presence. "I have to go to them," he announced on the 5th day after the challenge, his voice regaining its familiar strength. He stood, testing his mended ribs, his face set with grim determination. "You're not fully healed," I argued, though I knew it was useless. The dark circles under his eyes spoke of sleepless nights spent listening to the forest, sensing the unrest of his pack. "A pack without an alpha is a body without a head. It will tear itself apart," he said, pulling on a clean shirt. He turned to me, his hands gently cupping my face. "And they need to see you. Not as a rumor or a weakness, but as their Luna." My heart hammered against my ribs. The thought of facing a community of werewolves, many of whom already hated me, was terrifying. But looking into his eyes, I saw that this was as much a test for me as it was for him. He had stood for me, now I had to stand with him. "Okay," I breathed. "Let's go." The pack settlement was deeper in the forest than I had ever been, a collection of rustic, sturdy log homes built in a wide hidden valley. It was a real community, with smoke curling from chimneys and the sounds of life, yet as we walked into the central clearing, a wave of silence fell. Doors closed quietly. Faces peered from behind curtains. Those caught out in the open froze, their eyes wide, darting from Jax to me. The hostility was a physical force, a wall of suspicion and fear. They stared at my clothes, my human fragility, and their judgment was palpable. Jax ignored them. He walked to the center of the valley, to a large flat rock that served as a natural stage. He threw his head back and let out a howl. It was not a sound of aggression, but a pure, resonant summons that echoed through the valley. A call for the pack to assemble. Slowly they emerged. Families, lone wolves, elders with grizzled fur and cold, hard eyes. They gathered before the rock, a silent, intimidating crowd of nearly 100. I stood beside Jax, my hand in his, my back straight. I met every hostile stare, refusing to flinch, refusing to show the fear that was churning in my stomach. When they were all assembled, Jax spoke, his voice booming with alpha authority. "I am Jax, son of Kale, and I am your alpha. The challenge is done. The law of fear that my father ruled by is dead. We will be a pack of strength, honor, and unity." He paused, letting his words sink in. Then he raised our joined hands. "This is Elena. She is my mate. She is your Luna." A wave of angry, shocked murmurs swept through the crowd. An old, scarred wolf with a grizzled face stepped forward. "She is human. An outsider. She cannot lead us." Her courage turned the tide of the challenge. Jax's voice boomed, silencing the crowd. "Her voice carries the authority of this pack because it is my authority. She is the other half of my soul, and her word is my word." He looked down at me, then back to his people, his gaze daring anyone to challenge him. "This is my first decree as alpha," he declared, his voice ringing with absolute finality. "She will be respected as I am respected. She will be protected as I am protected. An insult to her is an insult to me. An attack on her is a declaration of war on your alpha. This is the law." He had thrown down the gauntlet. He hadn't just asked for their acceptance, he had commanded it. He had tied my fate, my very life, to his own authority. In the stunned silence that followed, I knew our life here would be a constant battle. We hadn't just won a fight, we had started a revolution. Chapter 16, The Trial of the Hunt. Jax's decree hung in the cold air, a challenge thrown at the feet of his pack. There was no applause, no cheer of acceptance. There was only a thick, resentful silence. It was broken by the old, scarred wolf who had spoken before. He stepped forward, his body rigid with defiance. His name was Kalen, and his eyes were the color of chips of ice. He had been one of Jax's father's most trusted advisors. "An alpha's word is law," Kalen growled, his voice a gravelly rumble that commanded attention. "But the traditions are the soul of the pack. They ensure our strength, our survival. A Luna must be more than just the alpha's chosen mate. She must prove she can provide for the pack. That she has the instinct, the strength, the spirit of the wolf." My hand tightened in Jax's. I knew what was coming. This was a political maneuver, a direct challenge to my legitimacy. "What are you saying, Kalen?" Jax asked, his voice dangerously low, the alpha's authority coiling around him like a physical presence. "I am saying she must face the trial of the hunt," Kalen declared, his icy gaze sweeping over me with contempt. "An ancient rite of passage for any new Luna, especially one of questionable blood." He spat the last words like a curse. "On the dawn of the third day, she will go into the forest alone. She must return by sunset with a kill worthy of the Alpha's table. If she succeeds, she proves her worth. If she fails..." He let the implication hang in the air, a threat more potent than any spoken word. "The pack will know she is a weakness we cannot afford." The crowd murmured its assent. It was a perfect trap. The trial was designed for the senses and strength of a werewolf. For a human, it was a death sentence, or at the very least, a guarantee of public failure and humiliation. "No," Jax snarled immediately, stepping in front of me protectively. "I will not allow it. My decree stands. She is your Luna. That is the end of it." "Then your pack will see you as a tyrant, not a leader," Kalen countered, his lips curling into a triumphant sneer. "You will shield your human pet behind decrees because you know she is not worthy. You prove our point for us, young Alpha. You prove your own weakness." Jax was trembling with a rage so profound I could feel it radiating from him, a palpable heat. His claws were starting to elongate from his fingertips. To refuse the trial would be to admit defeat, to confirm every fear and prejudice the old guard held. To accept it was to send me to my certain failure. But they had all made a critical error. They were so focused on what I was, human, that they had forgotten who I was. I was Elena, and I never, ever backed down from a challenge. I gently pushed Jax's arm aside and stepped forward, my posture erect, my chin high. I met Kalen's icy glare with my own unwavering gaze. "I accept the trial," I said, my voice clear and steady, ringing with a confidence that startled even me. A collective gasp rippled through the assembled pack. I saw shock on Kalen's face and a flash of fierce, terrified pride in Jax's eyes. "Let the pack witness my worth," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "On the dawn of the third day, I will hunt. And I will not fail." Chapter 17, The Luna's Gambit. The cabin became a war room. Jax was frantic, his protective instincts warring with the pride he felt in my courage. He wanted to teach me everything, how to track, how to read the wind, how to kill. But we both knew that in 2 days, I couldn't learn the skills a werewolf was born with. Competing on their terms was a losing game. So, I would compete on mine. "I'm not going to beat them at their game, Jax," I said, spreading a large topographical map of the state forest across the wooden table. "I'm going to change the rules." While he paced, a caged wolf in human skin, I worked. I was a student, a researcher, a strategist. I cross-referenced the topographical map with online satellite imagery and park ranger reports on local wildlife. I read articles on deer migration patterns, on wind currents in mountainous terrain, on the dietary habits of the herd that lived in our territory. My laptop screen glowed, a beacon of human knowledge in this primal world. Silas and Finn, now my staunchest allies, became my field experts. I would point to a section of the map and ask, "What is the scent like here? Is the ground soft? What predators hunt in this region?" Silas, his brow furrowed in concentration, would describe the subtle smells of pine and rock, while Finn would explain how the deer trails were faint on the stony ground of the northern ridge, making them difficult for even a wolf to follow. "Kalen expects me to go after the great stag," I theorized, circling a meadow on the map. "The big, impressive trophy kill. That's where he'll expect me to be." "It's the most honorable prey," Silas confirmed with a nod. "A challenge for any hunter." "And it's a trap," I said, my finger tracing a different path on the map. "He'll have his loyalists watching that area, ready to spook the prey, to ensure I fail. So we're not going there." My finger landed on a small, isolated valley, marked on the map as having a steep, almost impassable ravine on one side. "We're going here." Jax stopped pacing and looked at the map. "That's a dead end. The deer don't go there. It's too hard to get to, and there's no easy escape route." "Exactly," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. "There's no easy escape, which is why a predator wouldn't corner them there. But the ranger reports say a small, isolated herd of does was spotted wintering in that valley last year. They sacrifice freedom of movement for the security the ravine provides. They'll be calm, unwatched. It's not a trophy kill, Jax. It's smarter. A fat doe will feed more families than a stringy old stag. It's a true provider's hunt. It was a gambit, relying on human research and logic over shifter instinct and tradition. Jax stared at me, his amber eyes wide with a dawning understanding and a fierce, almost overwhelming love. He finally saw what I was doing. I wasn't just trying to survive a hunt. I was trying to prove, in a way the pack would have no choice but to understand, that a human Luna was not a liability. She was a new and powerful kind of asset. At dawn on the third day, armed with a hunting rifle Jax had taught me to use, a detailed map, and a strategy born of logic, I walked alone into the silent, waiting forest. Chapter 18, An Act of Sabotage. The forest was a living entity at dawn, breathing mist and shadow. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of a leaf, was magnified. The mating mark on my shoulder was a low, warm hum, a constant connection to Jax, who I knew was watching from the edge of the territory, bound by the laws of the trial not to interfere. His trust in me was a shield against the fear that threatened to creep in. My plan worked with a precision that was exhilarating. The main hunting grounds were eerily quiet, just as I'd predicted. I avoided them completely, using the compass and map to navigate the dense, untrodden parts of the woods. I found the hidden game trail leading to the isolated valley, a path so faint it was more of a suggestion than a trail. As I descended into the small, sheltered basin, the air grew still. And then I saw them. A herd of 5 does, grazing peacefully by a small stream, their coats thick for the coming winter. They were beautiful, calm, and completely unaware of my presence. This was it. This was the proof. A provider's hunt. I found my position, my heart pounding a steady, focused rhythm. I raised the rifle, my breathing even, just as Jax had taught me. I centered the largest, healthiest doe in my sights. My finger tightened on the trigger. Suddenly, a loud crack, like a tree branch snapping, echoed from the ridge above me. The does' heads shot up in alarm. Before I could react, 2 wolves, their fur a mangy brown, burst from the tree line, howling and charging not at me, but straight at the herd. They were Kalen's cronies. They weren't there to attack me, that would be a direct violation of the trial, but to ensure my failure. Sabotage. The deer scattered in a panic, disappearing into the dense woods in seconds. The 2 wolves skidded to a halt, turning to look at me with triumphant, mocking lupin grins before they loped away, their job done. Rage, hot and pure, burned through me. They had cheated. They had treated me like a fool. I stood there, trembling, the rifle feeling heavy and useless in my hands. I had failed. Despair washed over me, cold and bitter. But then, the rage hardened into something else. Resolve. I was not a victim. I would not let them win. I looked around, my mind racing. The deer were gone, but the wolves had been careless. In their haste, they had left a clear trail. They thought I would give up, but they didn't know me at all. I began to track them. It was a foolish, dangerous idea, but I was running on pure adrenaline and fury. An hour later, I found their prize. They had cornered and killed one of the does themselves, a violation of the hunt's sacred rules. They were tearing into it, a grotesque celebration of their treachery. That's when Jax arrived. He must have felt the spike of my terror and rage through the bond, a beacon he could not ignore. He burst into the clearing like a black-furred demon, a roar of incandescent fury tearing from his throat. The 2 wolves barely had time to look up before he was on them. The fight was short and brutal. He was the alpha, and they were common thugs. He dispatched them with a terrifying efficiency, leaving them broken and whimpering on the forest floor. He then turned to me, his wolf form trembling, his golden eyes wild with fear for my safety. He nudged me with his head, sniffing me from head to toe, making sure I was unharmed. The adrenaline crashed, and I fell against his warm, solid body, burying my face in his fur. He nudged me again, then began the shift, his form contracting back into the man I loved. He pulled me into his arms, his skin hot, his body shaking with the aftermath of his rage. "They will pay for this, Elena," he growled, his voice a raw, ragged thing. I will kill them for touching you. No, I whispered, looking from him to the dead doe. We will do something better. We will make them tell the truth. He looked at me, his eyes dark with a primal, possessive fire. The danger, the violation, and the fierce, violent relief of our reunion ignited the air between us. He crushed his mouth to mine, a kiss that was pure, raw claiming. It was a desperate, angry, and passionate affirmation of life, of us, right there in the blood-soaked clearing. He lifted me into his arms, his possession absolute, and in the heart of the forest that had tried to defeat me, he reminded me that I belonged to him, and he to me, with a ferocity that left no room for doubt. Chapter 19. The Reckoning. We walked back into the pack settlement just as the sun began to dip below the horizon. I wasn't empty-handed. Jax, in his wolf form, dragged the carcass of the doe the saboteurs had killed. I walked beside him, my face streaked with dirt and my clothes torn, but my head held high. The two disgraced wolves limped behind us, herded by Jax's menacing presence, their heads bowed in shame and fear. The entire pack was gathered in the clearing, their faces a mixture of anticipation and smug certainty. Kalen stood at the forefront, a self-satisfied smirk on his lips. He saw me, saw I carried no kill of my own, and his smirk widened. He thought he had one. The sun sets on the trial, Kalen announced, his voice booming with false solemnity. The human has failed. She has proven herself unworthy to be Luna. She has not failed, a deep growl answered him. Jax shifted back to his human form, his body radiating a cold, lethal fury. He stood before the crowd, naked and magnificent in his anger. She was betrayed. He shoved the two wolves forward, and they collapsed onto the ground before the pack. These two, acting on the orders of another, interfered with the trial. They drove off her prey and killed this doe themselves, breaking the most sacred law of the hunt. A wave of shocked and angry gasps swept through the pack. Cheating in a sacred trial was an unthinkable dishonor. Lies. Kalen spat. The human failed and now she makes excuses. Did I asked, my voice cutting through the noise. I stepped forward, holding up a small, muddy object. It was a distinctive leather pouch, one I had seen on Kalen's belt earlier. Then how do you explain this? I found it on the ridge, right where your thugs spooked my herd. Dropped in their haste, I imagine. Kalen's face went pale. All eyes turned to his belt, where a darker patch of leather showed where the pouch had been. Under the full force of Jax's alpha command, the two wolves confessed everything, their words tumbling out in a pathetic, terrified torrent. They named Kalen as the one who had given the order. The pack turned as one on the old wolf. The faces that had held contempt for me now burned with disgust for him. He had not only threatened me, an outsider, he had dishonored them all. He had corrupted their traditions to serve his own prejudice. Jax walked slowly towards Kalen, the silence in the clearing absolute. This was the defining moment of his leadership. The pack waited to see what he would do. The old law, his father's law, demanded Kalen's life for such profound treason. You have betrayed your alpha, Jax said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of thunder. You have betrayed your pack. And you have betrayed the very traditions you claimed to uphold. Kalen fell to his knees. Mercy, Alpha, he whimpered. Jax looked at the pathetic old wolf, then he looked at me, and then out at his people. My father would have torn out your throat for this, and many of you would have cheered, he said, his voice ringing with power. But his way is dead. Fear will no longer rule this pack. He pronounced his judgment. You will not die, Kalen. Death is too easy. You are stripped of your rank as elder. For 1 year, you will serve this pack. You will mend the homes of our families, you will prepare the kills from our hunts, you will take on the lowest of duties. You will learn, through sweat and service, that a pack's strength comes from what we build together, not from what we tear down. You will learn humility. It was a judgment of breathtaking wisdom. It was not the act of a tyrant, but of a true king. In that moment, Jax didn't just solidify his rule, he won the hearts of his people. And as the pack members, one by one, lowered their heads in a new, deeper respect for their alpha, they looked at me, no longer as the human weakness, but as the Luna whose intelligence and courage had exposed the poison in their midst and saved them from the old ways. Chapter 20: A New Dawn. The first snow of winter fell a month later, blanketing the valley in a soft, pristine white. The quiet of the season was mirrored by a new-found peace within the pack. The change was remarkable. The fear that had been a constant undercurrent was gone, replaced by a sense of purpose and a cautious but growing optimism. My life had transformed in ways I could never have imagined. My days were no longer filled with student council meetings and debate prep, but with learning the pack's ways. I helped the other women preserve the meat from the hunts, listened to the elders, the ones who had accepted me, tell stories of their history, and even helped mediate small disputes. They sought my counsel, valuing my calm, logical perspective. I hadn't changed them. We had found a way to merge our strengths. Kalen was a constant, humbling presence. He worked without complaint, his old arrogance stripped away, replaced by a quiet dignity in his service. The young pups of the pack, who held no memory of the old ways, would sometimes bring him a warm drink, a small act of kindness that spoke volumes about the new culture Jax was building. This evening, Jax and I sat before a roaring fire in the Alpha's cabin, which now felt more like a home than my childhood bedroom ever had. He was tracing the faint, silvery lines of the mating mark on my shoulder, his touch sending familiar, welcome shivers through me. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked quietly, his amber eyes soft in the firelight. "Your old life." I thought of the endless pressure, the pre-planned future, the feeling of being a perfectly crafted doll on a shelf. "I miss my friends," I admitted. "But I don't miss that life. I feel more like myself here, with you, than I ever did there. Here, my strength is an asset, not something I have to hide behind a smile." He leaned in and kissed me, a slow, deep kiss filled with all the unspoken words of the past few months. It was a kiss of profound peace and unwavering love. "I never thought this was possible," he murmured against my lips. "To lead them without becoming my father. You showed me how." "We showed them," I corrected him gently. "Together." Outside, a wolf howled, a long, joyous call to the moon, and was answered by another. It was the sound of a happy, healthy pack. It was the sound of our future. He was no longer the class freak, the boy who hid in the shadows. He was a leader, a king, surrounded by a loyal and thriving people. And I was no longer just the ambitious girl with a 5-year plan. I was a Luna, a partner, a queen. He was my alpha, and I was his Luna. But more than that, in the quiet moments when the world fell away, he was my Jax, and I was his Elena. We had fallen in love in the hallways of a high school, but we had built our home in the heart of the wild. And together, we were just getting started.